Jewish Channel's Week in Review. The rabbi arrested on charges of voyeurism. Could elections in Israel really be coming soon? Backstage with Cinderella's Jewish fairy godmother, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The top story in the Jewish world this week focuses on someone the Jewish Channel has been investigating for more than a year, Rabbi Barry Freundel, who was arrested last Tuesday on charges of voyeurism. Police have seized multiple recording devices found in Freundel's home and the ritual bath or mikvah that is associated with his synagogue, and said they found files suggesting women were recorded undressing and showering at the mikvah. The Jewish Channel can report that Freundel allegedly used the mikvah in 3 unusual ways that would have provided him rare solo access to the mikvah's changing rooms immediately before a woman would enter to change. A mikvah is most commonly accessible for women to immerse only at night and only for women. 7 women told the Jewish Channel, however, that Freundel required them to engage in what he called practice dunking during business hours, when he would show them the changing room before leaving. The 7 candidates who described the experience were part of conversion training under Freundel between late 2008 and 2014. For 3 women who converted before those years and spoke with the Jewish Channel, there was allegedly a different practice of redunking, with Freundel explaining that this was necessary because an initial conversion effort might have been invalid, according to those women. Even though a conversion requires 3 rabbis witness an immersion, none of these redunks involved either Freundel or the other rabbis they converted with witnessing the women's immersions directly. 2 of these women said Freundel specifically instructed them not to tell anyone about the redunk. And then there are the immersions of Freundel's college students from religion courses he taught at Towson University. According to multiple sources who spoke with the Jewish Channel, Freundel regularly told female students in his classes at Towson that they could try an immersion in the mikvah, and at least several have taken him up on that offer. Both the Rabbinical Council of America and the Israeli Chief Rabbinate have said they will continue to recognize all of Freundel's conversions as valid. Meantime, something that will likely soon be overturned in Israel is its government. New early elections are coming, according to reports citing sources in the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In a new election, according to reports, Netanyahu would seek a coalition that would include ultra-Orthodox parties that are currently not part of the governing coalition, while excluding more liberal parties like Finance Minister Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid party. Moving on, Cinderella's not a Jewish story, but the woman playing her fairy godmother on Broadway now is. Meredith Gansman goes backstage with Judy Kaye in a segment for our theater show, Row J.
Tony Award winner Judy Kaye is no stranger to the Rodgers and Hammerstein canon.
I grew up with this show on television. I was a tyke when this was first aired.
Stepping into the going-on 2-year run of Cinderella on Broadway, Kaye plays Marie.
Crazy Marie is a character in this little town, in this magical fairy tale country. She's sort of the town crazy lady, you know, bag lady. That is her disguise, because she transforms into everyone's fairy godmother. But in this case, especially Ella's fairy godmother, because Ella gives her kindness and generosity.
Also new to the cast is Keke Palmer. She's the first African-American to play the role of Cinderella on Broadway. Kaye was in the audience when Palmer made her debut.
And she came out and began, and it was so moving to me. I just burst into tears.
Kaye sees the impact Palmer has on audiences.
And you know, it's really cool. The other thing, especially the night that I was watching, intermission comes, and I look down from my little box where I'm watching the show and taking some notes, and everybody jumps out of their seat, and most especially all these little African-American girls dressed with tiaras, waltzing up the aisles. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life, because somebody who looked like them was up there playing this iconic character.
And now this production very realistically depicts its fairy tale theme that anything is possible.
And it also is about having a dream and realizing the dream, that everyone has it in their grasp, somehow to have a dream and to find a way to realize it.
So if indeed impossible things are happening every day, borrowing one of the Tony Award-winning dresses from Backstage shouldn't be so hard.
I see this actress come out in this. Yeah, look at that. Is that not astonishing?
Gorgeous. Can I borrow it for tonight?
You'll have to speak to the actress who wears it.
To see more from Judy Kay in Cinderella, tune into Row J and the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. The high holidays are over, but how do we look back and forward from this point? Christian Needham reports.
A year's worth of thoughts and reflections spelled out in the digital domain. Reboot's 10Q project returned this year, reaching out to some 20,000 people with a question a day for 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, asking participants for their thoughts on how they feel about the past year and the one ahead. I talked to the project's co-creator, Ben Greenman, about the goals of 10Q, including repeat participants being able to see their answers from years past.
One of the aims of the project is to get a through line where you can look back on 3, 4, 5 years of answering these questions. So there are questions like, what's something in the past year that you regret? What's something in the past year that you're proud of? What's a particularly spiritual experience, with spirituality being broadly construed, not just religious? What's something that happened in the world that affected you particularly this past year, and why? They're built more or less so that 5 questions look to the year that just happened and 5 questions look ahead to the year to come.
Reboot member Libby Linkinski has been participating in 10Q for 3 years and said she liked the broad, basic nature of the questions.
For me, that sort of like helps focus my attention on the more specific, concrete things, because I can be a little esoteric and like theoretical about these things. And one of the things that's really nice about the 10 questions and some of the questions specifically is that it kind of makes it more tangible and more real.
That's drawn several high-profile participants to share their answers in the past, including actress Jane Lynch, musician Moby, and screenwriter Diablo Cody, all using 10Q's writing space that pushes aside online distractions for the 10 minutes it takes most participants to answer their daily question.
There is no other internet when you're on this site. We were very, I think we wanted for people's concentration. We wanted to be very protective of that space. So we tried to make it very bare. It's just black and white and red. There's a box where you put your answer and that's it. You're not distracted by headlines or sports scores or stock prices or anything like that. It's just this environment and you answer the question, and that's a lot to ask in some ways of people, 10 minutes a day.
And though 10Q is open to anyone of any faith, Linkinski noted the importance of engaging Jews broadly through an online environment.
One of the things that I find really exciting about things like 10Q is that they bring that sense of Jewish community into the online space, which is where I experience community anyway today.
To see more about Reboot's 10Q project, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Finally, in this week's episode of Up Close, exploring the symbols we make, the symbols we wear, and the symbols we use to guide our lives. Of the more than 100 books read and authors interviewed for Up Close this year, certainly one that did more to surprise and shift my perspective is one we'll be looking at in this episode. How do symbols and restrictions, including those that are part of the Jewish tradition, free us to live better lives? I talk with Cornell University professor Tracy McNulty, author of Wrestling with the Angel, Experiments in the Symbolic Life. But before we get into the philosophy of symbols, we'll look at 2 more popular examples of symbols, tattoos and fashion. The fashion revolution of the 1990s is examined by New York Post reporter Maureen Callahan in Champagne Supernovas, Kate Moss, Marc Jacobs, Alexander McQueen, and the 90s renegades who remade fashion. And while clothes have been the standard for millennia, tattoos seem to be a new normal. BuzzFeed Books editor Isaac Fitzgerald and graphic journalist Wendy McNaughton talk about their collaboration, Pen and Ink, Tattoos, and the stories behind them. Here's some of the highlights from my interview with Tracy McNulty. There's a lot of discussion today in America, in Judaism, about the idea that all these laws are really holding us back from where we could be, and we see it certainly in a lot of rhetoric, certainly within, like, say, the Tea Party in America here today, and in the Jewish world, we see a lot of discussion of the idea that these are old restrictions that are keeping us from really becoming the person we want to be.
Right. In the political context, we see all kinds of examples like that today, where the written law, the Constitution, is just sort of cast off as this hindrance to taking action, right? And a lot of people have talked about the ways in which that represents a kind of resurgence of executive sovereignty and the idea of a president or a leader, right, who's no longer limited. But it also interested me in that it expresses this sort of idea that, you know, for George Bush, democracy is something that is in our blood, right? It's something whose spirit we have internalized. And therefore, we no longer need the Constitution. We no longer need the laws.
There's a lot here about how this idea in the modern world that we're just supposed to be kind of cast free to do whatever we might choose,
Right.
is kind of like, well, some early modern philosophers might refer to that as its own kind of enslavement to our impulses.
Right.
And then, but there's a lot within the idea of all these restrictions that we can find our better selves.
Yeah, so I was interested in the way in which, you know, we so often think about freedom as just freedom from restrictions, right? There's some external limitation on what I want to do, and the idea is to break from that. But in some ways, that's a very narrow idea of freedom. That's either impulsive, as you suggest, right, or one that's always situation specific, right? So my freedom is always defined solely in relation to some sort of external power that might be blocking me. So I was interested in other ways of thinking about struggling with constraints or with limits as itself enabling a more durable kind of freedom, a broader kind of freedom that's not always defined in relation to something else, right? And I think Mosaic law traditions in particular are one of the richest sources of thinking about that, but also one of the sources of this more cliched view you're talking about, right? Enslavement to the law, enslavement to practice, right? Inability to live in the modern world. And so I was interested in sort of going back to some of those traditions to, you know, think about what they might have to offer for thinking about the importance of the written law in particular today.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPTM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.